Architect Divya Chakravarti. She completed her undergraduate studies from SRM University and she went on to pursue her master's in historic preservation and urbanism and study of the built environment from the University of California, Los Angeles. She went on to work for the Department of Planning and Preservation for the city of Pasadena, California. She also did a brief stint of work for Historic Scotland, Edinburgh, UK. She also worked on conservation projects like Kalsa Mahal, Gokhale Hall in Chennai, and Marimalappa Educational Trust in Mysore. She is currently working as the Director of Samrakshan Heritage Consultancy. She is also a co-founder of the Artisan Reprisal of Traditional Materials, Method and Technology. She goes on to conduct workshops to revive traditional and lost methods of construction.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series for Bachelors of Architecture. The subject we are discussing is evolution of human settlements, and the topic we will be further delving into is human settlements in a changing world. In this unit, we shall be discussing global city and city origin, global economy and trade and its impact on cities, information and communication technology and its impact on cities, city of the future and future of cities, and finally sustainable cities. We will be starting off with global city and origin of cities. The whole word of global city is a new 21st century word that has emerged. It can also be described as a world city or an alpha city depending on which part of the world you are from. In UK it is different, in Asian countries it is referred to as different. But the main factor and criteria for a global city pretty much remain the same. It is an important node in global economic system, in the sense it is just not important for the country it exists in, but the entire economy of the world. This comes from a lot of geographical studies and urban studies, and the main idea is this is a result of globalization. So, it is globalization has largely created many cities and facilitated the emergence of powerful cities which contribute to global economy. And the topmost, the cream of these cities is referred to as the global cities. They have a global system of finance and trade. There is a particular hierarchy of importance to the operations, as well as they will have a lot of trade relationships with many other countries. For instance, you could have London in United Kingdom, New York and Los Angeles in United States of America, Mumbai for India. So, and many other cities like this in different parts of the globe emerge as global cities. So, if you actually look at the terminology of global city, this was something that came about in 1991 by Saskia Sassen, who is an urban planner. She came up with this city. Like the most important point of urban planners at that point of time, right after the phase of urban renewal, was this emergence of global economy and trade relationships between different parts of the globe as the technology increased and improved to facilitate such transatlantic or trans-Pacific relationships. So, first what was referred to as a mega city. Mega city was primarily only based on population, the size of the city, as well as the economics of the city as such with respect to the country. Let us take this a step further, and Saskia Sassen came up with the terminology of global city. Yes, the criteria remain the same, size matters, the population matters, but along with this it is even the types of population or the demographic. How cosmopolitan is the population? A truly global city should have cosmopolitan population. It cannot have only a single race or a single particular ethnicity existing in it. So, it should have a particular amount of contribution towards global economy, global businesses. It should have headquarters and many other such criteria. So, global city was the city of the future at that point of time. Now, we will just look at the criteria. When you actually see a global city and the status mentioned for it, there are actually a lot of disadvantages and advantages for listing out the criteria. Number one, yes, it is very important for us to know which are the global cities. it is beneficial, it is very much desired, but what usually happens is the criteria itself is from an example of a particular city, and because of that other important cities might be left out because they might not satisfy the same criteria which belongs to another part of the country or world. If you look at the other kinds of identification, you have a particular benchmark or yardstick value. Yes, now let us think of the country of India. If you look at the most important cities, for instance, Hyderabad and Bangalore are not so-called metro cities, but Bangalore is a very important global city in terms of, because it is referred to as the Silicon Valley of India. So, you cannot just take it as face value that yes, it is a metro city, henceforth it is a global city. It necessarily needn't be like that, because it is not only the population and the size of the city that matters, but what kind of contribution it has towards global economy, what kind of service sectors does it have, what kind of producing or manufacturing sectors that it has. So, if it becomes less cosmopolitan or less internationally renowned, it can later be declared as a non-global city, or it can be removed from that particular status as well. If we look at the characteristics of a particular global city, there are a number of them. So, you have international financial services. So, it should have in the financial sector, insurance sector, real estate, banking, accountancy and marketing, headquarters of several multinational corporations. It could be governmental corporations, it could be private, it could be both. And when I say government, I mean things like UNICEF, UNESCO on a global scale. The existence of financial headquarters, a stock exchange and major financial institutions, domination of the trade and economy of a large surrounding area, major manufacturing centers with port and container facilities, considerable decision making power on a daily basis and at a global level as well, centers of new ideas and innovation in business, economics, culture as well as politics, centers of media and communications for global networks, dominance of the national region with great international significance. So, along with being manufacturing centers, it is important that there is a service sector as well to support those manufacturing centers. And when you have financial important headquarters, at the same time you need to have manufacturing headquarters as well. So, when you think of a city like Bombay, it should have a stock exchange, yes. It has a global headquarters for a number of other cities. It is considered one of the most globally advanced cities in terms of financial and economical as well as statistical type of companies. So, it actually supports a lot of the companies which exist in other parts of the world. So, it provides a lot of service related activities. It could be both outsourced services as well as in-house servicing technology as well. There should be a high percentage of residents employed in the services sector as well as information sector, high quality educational institutions including renowned universities, both international with student attendance as well as research facilities, multifunctional infrastructure offering some of the best legal, medical and entertainment facilities in the country. So, if you actually look at the characteristics that we have just listed out, you can see there is a massive stress on manufacturing and service sector. There is no talk of anything to do with the lower income groups or the labor sector. So, that is one of the main disadvantages of a global city. Without the labor sector, the service sector as well as the manufacturing sector is not going to work. You need to have the blue collared workers. Without them, you are not going to have a successful economy. But when you describe the characteristics or the importance of a global city, this particular segment gets completely ignored, and that is one of the main drawbacks of characterizing a global city based on a city that is already renowned. For instance, this was done based on Los Angeles and New York. So, there is a complete absence of recognizing the importance of the labor sector. Now, if you look at the different kind of variants, now within a global city, what is it that has led to the description of a global city or the characteristics of a global city? So, in 2004, the rankings have come out acknowledging several new indicators while continuing to rank city economics more heavily than political or cultural factors. So, in the next category, in 1998, another kind of cities came into being, so called alpha world cities, that is 4 subcategories. You have beta world cities, gamma world cities, and additionally cities with high sufficiency or sufficiency presence. So, when you think of these, it is just a way to characterize cities for easier understanding of different urban scenarios. If you consider all of them to be global cities, it is difficult to study the nuances of every city. So, by creating subcategories and further other subcategories, we actually are able to understand the nuances of every individual city based on the factors that city is particularly based on. Now, if you look at the alpha plus cities, you have London and New York, which are vastly more integrated with the global economy than other cities. Then you have the alpha plus cities, which complement London and New York by filling advanced service niches for global economy. So, these are Tokyo and Paris for examples. Then you have the alpha and alpha cities, which are the link between major economic regions into the world economy. So, examples of these are Los Angeles and Moscow. Beta level cities are cities that link moderate economic regions into the world economy. Gamma level cities are cities linking smaller economic regions into the world economy. So, gamma level would be Detroit. Sufficiency level cities are cities that have a sufficient degree of services so as to not obviously depend on other world cities, which pretty much covers most of the urban centers in the world. Now, if you look at the power index or the global power city index, which pretty much is the main important way of describing a global city, you have 6 overall categories: economy, research and development, cultural interaction, livability, environment and accessibility. So, amongst these each category you have other indicators as well, which are more specific to that geographic location. Now, if you actually come to now origin of cities, which we have actually dealt with, and the whole fact of when you use the word city in the past, when I am talking about origin of cities, it is very deceptive, because the current situation, our city is distinguished from towns because of size and population, but that is after thousands of years of urbanization and rapid globalization. But 5,000 years ago, even with a meager inhabitant population of 1,000 or 5,000, they were still considered cities because of the way of life at that point of time. So, right after the Neolithic revolution, when you had agriculture which was developing as a occupation and a settled structure was developing and there was a population increase, that was the first time we have a recognized settlement or a city settlement. Initially, even though agriculture was the main base, there were still rural settlements, but as agriculture grew further and it could substantially support a larger population, it was considered a city. So, the progressive population growth allowed for this transformation of these rural settlements into urban centers, which involved the expansion of the cultivated land at the expense of the vegetation. So, new cities have appeared involving a continuous population and surface growth. So, this further grew because of weapons, the discovery and invention of other tools and other manufacturing equipment. So, all of this made sure that the city as such or the domination of a city was increasing. The origin and growth of urbanization in the world. So, if you look at urbanized cities, societies, how did it actually come into being? That happened in the 19th and 20th century as a result of industrialization. That was the first time you had an urban center or an urban core, and from there you had all the villagers coming in for a better life and they moved into the cities. This process of urbanization has moved rapidly since the 1800s till now, which actually the peak is not even in sight. Because currently, you can't say, in spite of so much of development in technology, you cannot say urbanization has stopped. Even today, there are a lot of migrants coming into every city from rural areas in search for a better life. A diminution of the rate of urbanization in the older industrial countries is being compensated by an increase in the rate in the underdeveloped areas. So, if in a developed country, if so-called urbanization is reduced, but it still continues at a greater pace in developing and underdeveloped countries. So, if you actually look at the definition of a city for an archaeologist defining it in the olden days, it could just mean a few hundred people, a larger area with a couple of public buildings. But now, that point of time, there were severe limitations both on size of the city as well as the population, because at that point of time the death rate was also quite high. So, if you actually look upon it in history, the first cities, even though small and hard to distinguish from towns, appeared in between 6000 and 5000 BC. The mounds of Mohenjo-daro in Sindh cover nearly a square mile. Harappa in Punjab had a walled area visible in 1853 with a perimeter of 2¼ miles. These are evidently cities with about 5,000 to 15,000 inhabitants. So, even though in today's context this might not be considered a city, definitely with respect to the facilities and the way it was laid out, it is definitely considered a city. The region that saw later and greater urban development was further north, the Greco-Roman world of Europe, which was flourishing during the period 600 to 400 AD. Iron tools and weapons, alphabetical writing, improved sailboats, cheap coinage, more democratic institutions, systematic colonization, all of this tended to increase production, stimulate trade and expand the effective political unit. A few cities reached a substantial size at this point of time. Athens, for example, reached its peak in the 5th century BC and achieved a population between 120,000 to 180,000. Urbanization has gone ahead much faster and reached greater proportions during the last 20th and 21st century than any other point of time in world history. So, later the regeneration of trade stimulated the redevelopment of the Western European countries, which became gain centers of product exchange with markets and fairs. So, at one point of time, our post-industrial revolution, there was a lull because of the crash. But later again the Western European countries picked up and they became centers of product exchange and markets. These cities were the centers that were most suffered from food crisis as well as epidemics, which periodically hit the pre-industrial societies. So, pre-industrial societies, when you had lack of hygiene and too many people coming in for no reason at one point of time, over congestion, all of this was happening at the same time. Black Death or the plague, for instance, was one of the deadliest pandemics which struck Europe in the second half of the 14th century. Cities have always received rural population. That will never end and it will never change. Even today, there will be a lot of people coming in from the rural centers to the urban centers across the world in different ways. This fact has of course been speeded up by the Industrial Revolution, and it has caused a great agglomeration since cities were not actually planned for fitting such a great number of people, nor the industrial activities they were developing. Now, apart from water pollution, there is also air pollution, which together with a lack of hygiene causes great public health problems. So, now when you are looking at the 11th and the 12th centuries, migrating to the city and breathing its air was a revolution for the rural population because it released people from the feudal slavery. So, which is the better thing? They were stuck between a hard place and the fire. Both the places were not offering them a great life, but they decided that they had not experienced the Industrial Revolution and everything about it struck awe in man's mind and man's heart. Oh, a machine is able to do all of this. Let's go work here. It is going to take us and our children into a better future. It's exactly what farmers think today about our cities. They will be having a good life with respect to clean air, clean water and good hygiene in the places they are. But in search of a better life, this better life could be defined in other ways as well. In search of the so-called better life, they move into cities to congested, overpopulated and overpolluted houses. So later, the Industrial Revolution turned the air of many of these cities unbearable. It was completely considered unsafe to live in certain cities because of the smog and the pollution. The urban environment has been degraded by its own growth, which has been often excessive and has entailed the continuously increasing land occupation, air and water pollution, climate modification, noise, light pollution as well as generation of solid waste. The final result is the contamination of the entire environment, which definitely brings about certain serious public health issues. A city of 1 million inhabitants today is not the sort of a place that a city of the same number was in 1900 or 1850. Moreover, with the emergence of giant cities of 5 to 15 million, something new has definitely been added. Such cities are the creatures of the 20th century. It is reflective of this period where there is such a growth of population. Our present degree of urbanization in advanced countries is still so new that we have no clear idea of how such complete world urbanization will actually affect human society. But the chances are these effects will definitely be profound and felt really soon. Rurality is going to soon disappear, leaving only a new kind of urban existence. The only reason a rural atmosphere is still existing is because the whole point of urban farms or urban agriculture is not caught on. If that too catches on, the whole rurality will completely disappear. The whole backbone of a particular country will also disappear. For instance, even in India as a developing country, we do have a lot of global cities. We have a lot of trade with other parts of the world. But agriculture is still the backbone of any economy. Forget being India, it has to feed the million people living in a city. The million people in a city have to be fed, and it is only because of agriculture existing away from the city that this is possible. Impact of global economy on cities. Now, if you think of urbanization over the past 25 years versus the urbanization of history, the impact of the past 25 years is far more profound, because you have to factor in the overall improvement of incomes as well as quality of life that has been experiencing by developing countries. The productive contribution of urbanization to national welfare may change as a result of global economic processes. But it's more than just providing more than half of a GDP. It is not sufficient to say that yes, a country is doing well by discussing only its GDP. The economic future of countries will depend to an increasing degree on the productivity of urban-based economic activities. So, despite an increase in urban incomes and urban productivity, there is growing urban poverty in most countries. So, if you actually say a country is steadily growing, how is it that there is a greater and greater percentage of poor people in the same country? Urban poverty and unemployment are directly affected by globalization. Absolute poverty is accompanied by growing inequality within cities. This is mainly due to skewed allocation of resources within cities. As the global economy comes to value these higher wage skills, existing patterns of inequality are being worsened. Like we discussed a few minutes ago, it is very important that the labor sector is given equal importance to that of the service sector. Yes, the service sector could be more educated or more skilled, but that doesn't mean the labor sector can be completely ignored. With the absence of a labor sector in a city, that city will perish over a couple of days. Because yes, economically, everything will be working fine, the banks will be running, everything will be running. But without the backbone of the labor industry, that is not going to be possible. And that's what causes the main inequality or divide within a city. Economic distress in all parts of the world is accompanied by and worsened by declining social cohesion, that is, you have crime, violence, drugs, etc. There is no particular reason we can attach to why this happens in a growing global economy, but it's definitely responsible for these patterns of behavior. It is indirectly definitely responsible. The relative weakness of public institutions and public policy. The importance of non-public actors in urban management therefore cannot be attributed to globalization but to accelerated privatization. That is one of the main differences that one has to understand. In a country like India, globalization is always mixed with privatization because as such our government doesn't participate in any global trade in the sense government bodies. I am not talking about the government as such with imports and exports. But because of the weakness of such public institutions and public policies, it is not the direct result of globalization, but it's a result of accelerated privatization which creates a divide and a difference. Weak centralized public institutions have given way towards decentralizing of responsibility for policy and services. Decentralization has also strengthened local participatory processes and permitted higher levels of accountability and transparency. It is clear that urban environmental problems are increasingly understood. This is not in most cases a result of globalization. Foreign capital may be less sensitive to sustainable uses of locally available resources. So, all of these are how this urbanization has happened over the past 25-30 years. The last characteristic of an urbanized society or a world urbanization experience is the parallel process of urban concentration in megacities and the accelerated growth of secondary towns and cities. Though this process would have occurred regardless of globalization, it would have definitely been slower and for us to comprehend these particular changes. It is apparent that global economy increases local vulnerability to macroeconomic changes, mainly because of a pace of change and there is a lag in the response. Now, if you look at the indicators of impact and change, two areas where short-term changes may occur are export markets and the tourism industry. The other impacts may have longer incubation periods. In the sense, you will not see the impact right away, but it will take a couple of years or maybe even a decade for us to see the effect. The physical changes in land use is another important impact. Many foreign investments change the existing city plans, grids, layouts and even codes of land use or construction. This is definitely a direct manifestation of globalization. For instance, in a city like Chennai, compared to Mumbai, the FSI, the level of skyscrapers is definitely been lesser than other cities. Mumbai has far more skyscrapers than Chennai, and Chennai, for instance, has never encouraged it because for us space was never a constraint. We believed in growing in all four directions, versus now because of competing with other cities to get headquarters or the so-called IT industry over here, we have started developing skyscrapers and taller buildings which needn't be true to the urban fabric or true to our building codes. So, codes and public policies are being modified to suit these needs. At the end of this, we would have covered global city and city origin, global economy and trade and its impact on cities. At the end of this lecture, we should be able to answer the following questions. What is a global city? What is the criteria for a global city? Discuss the origin and growth of urbanization. That brings us to the end of this lecture. Thank you.